Good morning, Jake. Good morning to you. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Pierre. I'm very good, thank you. The sun is shining. Looking forward to talking with you. Obviously, big shoes to fill with no Nico today, but I'll do the best job that I can.
It is big shoes to fill, but if there's anyone who can do it, it's definitely you, Jake. That is absolutely for sure. And yes, I heard actually it was snowing in the UK where you were yesterday, but now the sun is back.
Yeah, yesterday was ridiculous. It was definitely four seasons in one day. It was like the sun was shining like this, and then 10 minutes later it was snowing and freezing cold. So that's the wonders of spring in England, I think.
Yeah, I saw this picture because here in Malta there's been this like sand rain that comes from time to time. It's like the Sahara is being brought over
Yeah,
from, and I saw that the other day someone posted that you can go skiing in the sand because in Austria it had gotten so much sand rain that the whole mountains were full of sand. You know, yeah, it's a little bit upside down at the moment, but in either case, now we are here and we have a really exciting and cool hour ahead of us here, of course. Um, and so just wanted to start here by mentioning, Jake, that obviously the Fridays here, we are really happy to be sponsored by PlayZone today, as we saw here in the intro. Really happy to be supported and to kind of keep these streams and updates going, which is obviously a great thing. So just thanks to PlayZone, of course, for bringing us live. And also good morning to Lars here. Yes, it can be a bit confusing sometimes with the audio here, having two windows open. I hope that the audio is okay. And before we start, I just want to mention for those of you guys who are listening in today that we have just launched a new really cool service where we deliver news through Telegram. I'm not sure if people in this demographic is using Telegram overall, but it's a really great app which is similar to WhatsApp, which is essentially a way for us to deliver short and compact news directly into the phone. It's free, easy to use, and so on. And our head of marketing here, he asked me basically to mention this because he wants to play a little video that is 15 seconds long. So Nico, feel free to show the little video that you have prepared. If technology. All right, bingo, bango, bongo. So I hope you were quick to get that QR code. But in any case, you can just search on iGaming Next on Telegram, and you'll be able to kind of join that group and get the latest and greatest news here. So essentially, Jake, I mean, you're the managing editor of iGaming Next, of course. You have, if anyone in this industry has the finger on the pulse, it is you. And I guess as a starting point here today, Jake, like, we missed doing this weekly news last week, so we actually have you could say up to a 2-week update today, but we're gonna still kind of keep the topics within the last week or so. But can you just kind of give an update on an overview, just to summarize the 1 or 2 weeks that we have behind us here? What are kind of some of the more interesting movements from your perspective?
yeah, of course. I mean, like always, the US has kind of dominated a lot of the headlines. We're still seeing companies even now basically look to enter the market for the very first time. You know, it feels like we've been talking about this ever since PASPA was repealed, and a lot of the big operators have huge footholds in the market already. But there are others that are still looking around and thinking, you know, how can we get our share of this huge opportunity? And you know, a couple of those have launched this week with different products and services, and I think we're going to speak about that in some more details later on. The other thing that comes to mind is I think we're coming out the back end of results season now. So Sport Radar reported this week they had fantastic year by all accounts. Once again, driven by US performance. I think US Q4 US revenue rose by 91.5%, and they more than doubled it year on year as well to over 70 million. So you know, this is why all these companies are scratching around, wondering how they can do something similar.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's this period now, you could say, which is a little bit in between, so to say, where, as you mentioned here, we're coming out of the back of the Q4 reports, and now we are waiting for the Q1 reports season to begin, essentially, which is always
which isn't far away. It's in April. I got a notification from Canby today saying make sure you book in for our Q1s, and you think, well, hold on, the Q4s have only just stopped. But that is such the cycle that we that we monitor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, also to mention here today, we have some really exciting thing ahead of us here, which is the fact that we are being joined by the Jesus of the iGaming industry, you could say, which is Robin Eric Reed, or should we say, I would say more the Steve Jobs of the iGaming industry. I would say actually is more appropriate for Robin Eric Reed, considering the history with GIG as he founded and so on. But Robin will be joining us at around 10:30 a.m. CAT here today. We're going to discuss a little bit more around retention in the US online gambling market, which is going to be a key kind of KPI for the US online gambling companies in order to be successful here as we go forward into 2022 and 2023, where the operators are hoping to see profitability in that market. So it'll be really interesting to hear Robin's thoughts on that. He's been quite active on that front as well. And good morning to Morgan as well. Good to have you with us. But as a first topic today, Jake, I wanted to just jump in and talk a little bit about the winners and the losers on the stock market in the last week here within the iGaming industry. And as you point out here, Jake, obviously, Sportradar came out of their Q4 earnings in a really positive light. They managed to increase their market capitalization by 8.3%, which obviously is very positive in the current climate as we are going through this now. But that is actually that actually doesn't place them even in the top 3 of iGaming organizations that have been doing well on the stock market this week. Actually, Gaming Innovation Group has been doing really well as well, up 11.2% on the markets. And Scout Gaming has been are the standout here this week, which have increased the market capitalization by 17%, which is great as well. Checkin.com, I don't know if you can call them an iGaming company. It's one of the verticals, one of the most
affiliate
important.
business, don't they?
Yeah, they were kind of born out of the iGaming industry as they specialize in optimizing registration flows, which is very, very, very important for the iGaming industry. Is to optimize the registration flow wherever you can, essentially. And so Checkin.com has had quite of a roller coaster ride on the stock markets, but last week they were up about 13% on the markets. But let's look at the biggest losers on the markets. There's one really big standout here, which is Codere, a Spanish iGaming brand, which have lost 72% market share in the last week. Codere is an operator, if I'm not mistaken, that is specialized on the Spanish market specifically. And obviously, Spain has had a lot of headwinds in the last years, I'd say, with marketing restrictions, tighter regulation, and so on. And Codere actually lost like 94% of the market capitalization in the last year, but 72% here in the last week off the back of their Q4 report. So
I think I haven't had a chance to look at their Q4 report yet for the reasons this week, but a big part of that, looking back a year, is that traditionally, as you say, they were a big Spanish kind of retail operator, but they were mounting up huge losses, and they basically had to come to a decision of how they were going to fix the future strategy. And I think they separately listed the online division. So Codere Interactive is now a listed business, and that's the online division that also is looking to go into LATAM and the US and things like that. Whereas the land-based section of Codere was kind of left in the background. But as I say, 72% over such a short period of time seems crazy. I'll have to dive into the reasons behind that.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be interesting to look into that further. I think they blamed the Spanish, the difficult climate in Spain, essentially from the short from the short news that I read, at least, but should be something like that. And then actually our beloved Evolution here has had a pretty bad week as well, with which is down about 7% on the markets this week. Evolution has really been a bouncing ball as well in the last couple of months here. Investors have had a bit of a difficult time to understand how to value this share, because the financially the company is performing extremely well. I mean, if you only look at their EBITDA result and the EBITDA margin and the revenue within Evolution in the last 15 quarters or something like that, you can see a very stable growth. But looking at the stock market, Evolution has lost. They are down like 25% over the last 12 months.
Yeah,
and
I think we've spoken about
obviously,
this before, that the financial figures is not to do with that, and it's more regulatory concerns, I think, from people that are fully aware of the business. But as we've spoken about before, it's kind of a high growth stock in a growth market, and it's difficult to determine at the moment whether these are driven by macroeconomic factors, because we're obviously in a ridiculously uncertain period of time with rising energy prices, obviously the war in Ukraine, cost of living going up in everywhere, certainly here in the UK. And yeah, I think investors have a really tricky time of it at the moment, trying to analyze these gaming stocks as best they can, because there's a number of contributing factors to what's moving the share price, and not all of them are related to our sector, I would say.
yeah, exactly. And they also have these two short seller reports behind them, which essentially particularly the second short seller report, which basically made the argument that Evolution should not be valued, like the unregulated revenue should not be valued to the same multiple as the regulated revenue is. So the argument is basically, if you take Evolution's unregulated revenue and you put a lower multiple on that revenue, then the share price should be more like 600 SEK, as opposed to the 1,000, which it is right now. But that seemed to be what caused the turmoil in the share price a couple of months ago. And for me, the interesting thing is like why would unregulated revenue be valued at a lower multiple? And I guess the argument from the short sellers' point of view is that unregulated revenue can become like an unregulated market can become a black market. But
it's at risk.
Yeah, but if you look at markets and which direction they have chosen to take, whether to go black or to go white, there aren't really that many. There aren't really that many examples of markets that go black. Like it's pretty clear at this stage that regulating is the right way to go, and so when a market regulates, obviously there is tax implications on the revenue and so on, marketing restrictions and so on and so forth, and so you could actually make the argument that you can quite easily make the argument actually that unregulated revenues should be valued at a higher multiple than regulated revenues. I mean, I don't think anyone can make the argument that revenues from New York, for example, as an operator, should be valued to a very high multiple, because obviously there's an incredibly high tax rate in that state, for example. So I think the shareholders of Evolution trying to figure out this situation at the moment is a little bit misguided, in my opinion.
I mean, it's how you try to balance it in your mind, I guess, between sort of financial reward and regulatory risk. And I think you're right. Like, look at Ontario. That was a grey market until next week, and that's basically regulating, and that's going to be a kind of seamless transition where unregulated operators, admittedly, they've had to stop for the last couple of weeks or whatever it is, but they'll be able to go live no problem with their regulated operations. But I think Western markets and European markets are more likely to take that approach than some of the markets which are of concern to Evolution investors. Some of the Asian markets, the further east you go, the more kind of the attitude towards gambling is less friendly, I would say. So that's probably why those territories, especially some of those high growth territories on those continents, aren't necessarily going to go from black to regulating or from grey to regulating. It might be a trickier path than that.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned Ontario here, and I think we can't leave this weekly news without talking a little bit about Ontario. Especially, I was lucky enough to have a conversation with Paul Burns, who is the president and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, the other day. And actually, it's a bit of a misunderstanding that operators have to shut off the operation until the market goes live, because that was the perception from the stories that came out the other week. But Paul said, actually, the regulator is being very lenient to the operators. And what happened is that when like the operators that have gotten the license or have applied for the license in Canada, they are actually allowed to continue to operate grey until the market goes live. But the operators who choose to not apply for the license, they like at this stage, and they have to go dark basically. But if they continue to operate without applying for a license, they very likely will not be granted a license later on. And so the operators, they have to make a decision now in Ontario. Do you want to go the regulated route, or do you want to go the unregulated route? And that is a permanent decision, so to say, which is quite interesting.
I don't think we'll see too many going down the unregulated route, because it's a market of favourable conditions by all accounts. And I think you're right. There was no definitive strict cooling off period like we've seen in the Netherlands. There was nothing like that. The operators have been able to keep going. But I think DraftKings and FanDuel, DraftKings particularly, has expressed its concerns already that it's entering this market afresh, while others have been there, racking up databases, racking up revenue for a long time now. But they both had to shut down their DFS products in advance of launching real money online sports betting. So I guess it's going to be interesting to see what the US companies have to do to facilitate the launch in Ontario. The ones that have never been there before. And Jason Robbins said, didn't he, a couple of weeks ago, that he was, it's going to be some challenge basically. And he doesn't think that the market share in Ontario is going to match their level of market share in US states.
No, exactly. And that's an interesting topic in its own right. I want to just say good morning to everyone who's joining us here this morning. Good morning, Emily, Giovanni, Alexander, and Henry. It's nice to have you guys here with us today for this little morning chat. And
good morning,
Jake,
guys.
And Jake, what's interesting as well is Paul spoke about how good the Ontario regulator is to work with the industry, and I mentioned it to him as well. I mean, that is not something that the European operators are used to with the European regulators, of course, which is kind of shunning the operators in order to score political points from time to time here. That's the feeling, at least, we get from the European markets. But take example of the B2B side of things. And I do think this is a brilliant, easy, and good solution in order to kind of cripple the gray and black market. The gray market. So basically, take Evolution, for example. Evolution, they don't have to apply for a license in Ontario, but they have to kind of sign a contract, something like that. They have to they have to agree to some terms basically, and
Yeah.
one of these terms is essentially that they can't supply gray market operators with their games, and if they do that, they are not considered an unacceptable B2B supplier, which means that the regulated operators are not allowed to display the games of that supplier. So basically, Evolution and all the other game suppliers, they have a choice to make, which is either you supply only the gray market or you supply only the regulated market. And so you can imagine for a company like Evolution, then who have to make this choice, obviously they're going to go down the regulated route. So they're going to supply the regulated operators, which means that the unregulated offering will be crippled. You know, you won't be able to access Evolution's games in unregulated offerings as an Ontario resident, basically. And that's a great way, I thought, to just cripple the gray market, because they won't have access to the tier one game suppliers.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and it's an issue that they might have learned from elsewhere, because obviously we've seen Sweden struggle with this for some time, where basically the licensed operators are bound by certain restrictions in the regulated market that their offshore counterparts aren't, and the same games are available at the offshore operators, who are able to offer better bonuses, better welcome offers, everything else. And that's why Sweden is now pursuing B2B licensing, which operators have campaigned for some time, because it will level that playing field and mean that there's fewer reasons to go offshore. And I think you're right. Like Ontario, you know, as a regulator, it's got it right, and Denmark is probably the kind of shining light in terms of European regulation from the industry's perspective. But I'm excited about Ontario. It seems crazy to me. Like, it's going to be one of the most competitive markets ever, by the sounds of it. As kind of evidence for that, there's a very exclusive UK bookmaker, which is kind of focused on providing land-based luxury kind of experiences for high-end clientele. It's called Fitzdares, and it basically has a very exclusive members club in Soho in London. And you go in, and there's kind of, you know, leather-bound Chesterfield sofas everywhere, and it's a kind of hark back to the days of the 50s and 60s, and they, as far as I know, are only operational in Ireland and the UK. But even they are going for a license in Ontario, and they have barely no online betting presence whatsoever. But it sounds like they're going to be launching online with an FSB powered sportsbook, and also they're opening a members club. I think their first overseas members club in Toronto as well, in Ontario. So it just shows that this new province is going to be an opportunity for just about every business in gambling, by the sounds of things.
Absolutely, and a reasonable tax rate as well, 20%, I believe it is in Ontario. And it really just seems that the regulator in Ontario has been proactive, working with the industry in order to figure out the regulation that just makes sense. You know, this is what the industry has been saying all along. And you know, the funny thing is, like, all the operators, they support this kind of measures in order to cripple the gray market, like shutting out the tier one game suppliers from being able to offer the games to gray market and so on and so forth. So I think that it seems like Ontario regulator are the regulator that have gotten it right, you know, and looking at the global regulation of this industry, it really seems to me to be one of the first times that the regulator has actually managed to put together a regulation that makes a lot of sense. So it will be interesting. It's the market is launching on the 5th of April, I believe.
4th of April, yeah.
4th April. And it's on Monday.
You could make comparisons with New Jersey in the US, I suppose. Is like, you know, this is really one of the first province. Well, it is the first province to launch fully fledged online iGaming and online sports betting together. And then other provinces in Canada will have to look at this example, see how the market goes, and sort of base their legislation around what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely. Super interesting movements in Ontario, and it'll be very interesting to follow up here now in next week as the market launches. We are really curious to follow up to see what are the first indications in the market, especially who's going to grab most market share. It's this ever reoccurring question if the European operators who have established foothold, established databases, and so on are going to be able to establish dominance in the market, or if it will be the American really well-known household brands like the DraftKings and so on.
And the domestic Canadian brands like the Score, for example. We've never seen them launch an online sportsbook before, and they're the biggest media company in the country. So, even more competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting, Jake. Before we move on to the next topic, our dear head of marketing here also reminded me that we have a second sponsor on board today, which is Simpler, which we're really happy to have on board as well. And so, if you guys have patience, we want to show you a little bit of a snippet of what Simpler does as well. So feel free to play that little video as well. What a beautifully animated little video. Thank you so much for that. It's Simpler for coming on board with us today. And again, thank you guys for joining in with us today as well for this weekly little news update here. So in the cozy corners of LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. So on to the next thing. We have a really special guest with us here today. As we mentioned here in the beginning, the Steve Jobs of iGaming, Robin Erik Reed, is going to join us here for the next 10 minutes, and we would love to have a little conversation with Robin in order to figure out the retention question in the US market, because there has been such a big focus on acquisition in the US market in order to reach a really high level market share. But obviously, in order to become profitable, you also have to retain the players on a long-term basis in order to achieve those lifetime values that the operators are looking for. So without further ado, if we can get Robin into the stream here. There we go. Good morning, Robin. How are you doing today?
Morning, Pierre. Good. Thanks for having me. How are you, Jake?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for joining us, Robin.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for joining us here on short notice today, Robin. The background to this invitation here in the morning is essentially the other week we were discussing retention and who does the US market belong to. And you came with a really interesting analysis here on the kind of like a bull case for DraftKings specifically, that they have been able to retain the players really well. So I would like to ask you, Robin, just zooming in on the American market specifically, and perhaps DraftKings as well. Can you talk about the path to profitability in the US market that you, as you see it, and give a little bit more insight perhaps on what DraftKings have been able to achieve so far in terms of retention rates?
Yeah, very interesting topic here. So obviously my history with the American market goes back to 2017 and 18, when Gaming Innovation Group helped Hard Rock go online in New Jersey. And since then, a lot has happened. And these days, I'm increasingly involved through happyhour.io, where we are involved with both a listing in New York. We're having 2 private placements, and we are working B2B with a couple of products with a number of these operators. So I'm starting to get really into the mix of the US market again, and it's so exciting to see what's going on. If we take a bird's eye sort of view on the market, then I think it is sort of widely regarded that the total addressable market would reach somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 billion over the next few years. And obviously with a volatile share price, the question people are asking themselves with taxation rates and with high marketing spends and so forth is how much of this will be on the bottom line. If you're looking at the companies now and how they are performing, most of the focus is on the CPAs and the marketing cost. And you obviously had DraftKings, for instance, mentioning how they were hoping to reach a 10% marketing delta, so in essence spending 10% of their revenues on marketing, which is lower than what you would expect in most international markets for gambling, at least historically in this industry. However, perhaps more of the focus should be drafted to the retention rates to understand that better, to understand the ultimate profitability. Because we have a very different situation in the US compared to many other markets, in that there is essentially 3 companies who are having a very large share of the wallet. Perhaps you can increase that to 5 companies. You know, I heard your podcast with the Morgan Stanley analyst the other day, who mentioned how he sees 85% of the market belonging to the top 5 players, which is a very top-heavy sort of concentration compared to some other markets. Now, what is very interesting to see here, if we take some stats, if you go back to, for instance, Golden Nugget, then they released a stat at the start of 2021, where they said at the end of 2020, their 5-year gross lifetime value per customer was approximately $7,600 US. $7,600 US. Now compare that to iGaming companies, you know, online specialists in, for instance, the Nordics or in Europe, which is calculating anywhere between, you know, 800, 1,500 euro. We have a several times higher lifetime value. If you look into those stats further, you would see that their average RPU, or so basically the average revenue per user for Golden Nugget was 631 per depositing customers per month. Okay, so they're having 600 RPU per month. Now, that stat might initially sort of seem almost too good to be true. It's astonishing. But I think what we have to think about here is that you only have really a few competitors who have a much larger share of wallet than in the European companies. So what we've heard before is that in Europe, a casino player, for instance, or even a sportsbook player would maybe have something like 4, 5, 6 accounts that they play at concurrently. Now, if you then go and look at the data coming out of the listed companies, they still have 150, 160, 200 euro average revenue per user. So not up to the 600 plus that Golden Nugget is reporting, and 1/3 of that. But then keeping in mind that people multi-account in Europe, whilst in US, they seem to be much more loyal to their one provider. So to me, it seems that sort of the average revenue per user is higher in the US, but not that much higher than in Europe. However, there is fewer companies keeping a larger share of wallet for each customer. So then let's test that thesis towards some retention stats that we got from the other companies. Let's go into DraftKings, for instance. Now, they just had their investor day, their capital market day, and they provided one stat that I think was incredible, where they said that by the end of year 1, they have retained 83% of the customers acquired in that year. And by the end of year 2, they're at 80%, 88% of year 1, or 73% of the original cohort. In year 3, it drops to 70% of the original cohort. Okay, and here comes the interesting part. While they lose players, the revenues from the remaining customers continues to grow. So with year 2 revenues at 122% of the year 1 revenues, and that rises to 143% of the year 1 revenues by year 3. So a lot of numbers and data there, and if you weren't following them all, in essence, what they were saying is that they're retaining 80 to 90% of their customer database long term, and that the revenues of those players that are left far exceeds the cohort initially, when all the players were in. So looking at some rather amazing retention stats in the US. And what is driving this? Obviously that there is only a few companies that is now having a very large share of wallet. Okay, so if we're going to judge these shares, perhaps their estimates in terms of EBITDA margin and so forth is quite accurate. However, what remains unanswered is whether we will have digital challengers. Will there be a lot of new companies entering the market? You know, you have, Supergroup entering the market as an example. You have so many challengers sort of lurking beneath of these larger companies. Then you also have some very large prominent players that have not yet properly entered. Las Vegas Sands have not entered. If you take, for instance, a risk, they just placed a $9 billion playtech that ultimately got rejected. So they're sitting on, a $9-10 billion war chest that they're going to use for online. They're sitting on one of the largest social casino databases. They have not yet entered. And so I think one of the key questions is no longer around sort of the total addressable market and whether they will reach their EBITDA margins and the marketing profitability and so forth. Retention rates are coming out very good, perhaps in line with what should be expected. However, will it be that concentrated that the top 3-4 players are taking 80-85% of the market, or will there come new challengers that will disrupt that market division? I think that's one of the key questions we need to ask ourselves now.
Very interesting, analysis, Robin here. So essentially, what you are saying is that these expected kind of EBITDA margins and profitability in the long term, it seems that the indications are now that they are quite accurate. That a company like DraftKings, for example, if they retain the level of market share, that they could reach that kind of like $1 billion USD plus EBITDA in a year that would justify this high this high market cap as they currently have. But the question is then rather, will new entries? So this is another question then, because right now perhaps Sands and other potential players are keeping themselves out of the market at the moment because the level of marketing spend is just according to them unreasonably high, and the expectation now going forward is that there will be better marketing efficiency in the market. So DraftKings, FanDuel, and others will start decreasing the marketing spend in order to kind of maintain and retain the databases that they have. And once the this kind of battlefield for marketing and for visibility subdues, maybe that is the right time for plenty of other operators to try to then enter the market again. But wouldn't that just trigger a new kind of marketing war, so to say, between these operators?
Look, so if we're looking at sort of the two sort of main KPIs, what is your cost per acquisition? What is your customer lifetime value? Sort of what is your acquisition cost? What is your retention ability? Okay, so let's go back and focus then a little bit on the acquisition. You also have some players now withdrawing from the market. You, for instance, had Churchill Downs, who just released sort of a statement saying that they would sell their market access deals and so forth, and they were pulling the plug. You previously had WinBet, where there has been speculation of similar. However, I met their CEO of online, their president, Ian Williams, in Las Vegas last month, and he told me that was that wasn't his words, but bullshit. They were very bullish on the US market and were going nowhere with WinBet. So, but there are obviously players that takes a step back. And if you're looking at some of the acquisition mechanics now that I find very interesting, let's take, for instance, BetMGM, which is now the iGaming leader in the US market. And obviously, that's a separate topic, but iGaming an incredibly important vertical in terms of profitability and market size. Now, what we see is that the CPA they have under MGM source FTDs, so that's the FTDs that they're crossing over from their end life retention sort of plan, their loyalty program in the land-based industry, is 28% of the CPA of non-MGA source FTDs. Okay, so it is about 1/3 of the cost, but the GGR is 157% higher. Okay, so they're able to cross-market at 1/3 of the cost to 158% higher value customer. Now, how do you compete with that as a digital challenger with media spends and so forth? Obviously, you can't. So initially, what we're seeing now is that the sort of major players is either having the ability to cross-convert from their DFS databases or from their land-based databases, which they're obviously getting an enormous advantage over. And perhaps whilst that is still new, whilst that cross-conversion is still happening, you might not want to go in and compete for the attention of those customers. But obviously, the dust will ultimately settle here. That cross conversion will happen. Those databases will, to some degree, not be depleted, but sort of will be harvested. And then the market will open up a little bit again, because then we all need to acquire players from the same databases. So I think there is going to come a wave, say 12 to 24 months from now, where many new players will start to enter the market and try to compete for those market shares. And the question you asked, sort of what will happen to the CPA there, I actually think the operators will get more effective. They will be more efficient in their marketing. Originally, it's a new market. It's many available media sources, sponsorships, and so forth, avenues to explore. And obviously, you will then figure out what works and what doesn't. This knowledge will cross-pollinate across the industry. They will start to become more targeted and more pro-efficient in targeting those channels that actually works, which then should bring the marketing costs down of those companies who are able to compete, but obviously increase the threshold to be able to compete in those channels. So I think the initial cost you see now is quite high for CPAs. It will go down. It will never be cheap. It will always be expensive. It will always be super tough. But I think you will see slightly cheaper CPAs down the road than what you have now. Obviously not on the cross conversion, but on sort of the mainstream channels.
Very interesting, Robin. Thanks for the analysis here. So I guess it would be an easy last question then. Bull or bear on the American market? It sounds like it's a quite given answer here. Yes.
Bull.
Yes. Very interesting. Would you have said the same 6 months ago?
Yeah, I was bull on the market 6 months ago, but I think I'm more positive now. Partially from an investor perspective, also because the share prices are much lower. So yes. It's a better case to make money on, obviously. But in general, I think we have confirmed more of the thesis over the last 6 months than perhaps many would have expected.
And the final question here: why have the share prices come down to that extent when the market is seemingly proving itself to be turning out the way we are hoping that it will turn out?
Perhaps other people are better equipped to answer that than me. If I were to speculate, I think the marketing spend that has sort of occurred in so far has made people cautious. There is really only one company in sort of Flutter and FanDuel that has shown very, very strong initial sort of not profitability, because they're minus 250 or so, I believe, for the year, but that has satisfied the market reasonably. DraftKings, for instance, people are very cautious about their marketing spend in terms of delta to revenues and so forth. Whether it's justified or not remains to be seen, but I think the market obviously can afford. They are not operational. They don't have to be in the company right now if they don't want to, so they can take a step back and then come back in again.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Robin, for joining us here last minute today and giving this great insights. It certainly is the best bull case that I've heard for the US market. Clear black and white numbers, and very interesting to hear. Let's follow up on this soon again. Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you guys for the good
content. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. All right, Jake, what's your thoughts on Robin's comments?
No, that was fantastic. You know, that level of insight is brilliant to be to experience, really. And I mean, what he says makes perfect sense. And when you think about retention and you look at the top 4 or 5 players in the market, it's no coincidence that all of them have these huge databases that they can rely on, right? You've got DraftKings and FanDuel, which amassed multi-million user databases in DFS before ever entering online sports betting or iGaming. MGM, as Robin pointed out, you know, financially their M Life loyalty rewards program, which is from their land-based casinos, is driving, I think he said, a third more revenue than customers that are acquired via other marketing means. And even kind of the new entrants that he speaks about, and we spoke to Morgan Stanley, and they name check Fanatics, and I think that's one company that could potentially come in and infiltrate this kind of top 5 operators. They've got 80 million users of active buyers of sports merchandise, right? Yeah. So, you know, if this is the one thing all of these market leaders have in common, is these actively engaged sports databases, and that's making a world of difference, as we can see. But yeah, just to look at one of the questions here, with 4 or 5 brands controlling practically 80% of the US market, does anyone think the rest of the brands has anything to fight for in the long term? And I think that's a really interesting question, and it's something we discussed with Chris Grove on Twitter yesterday. And I think Bogdan has partially answered that question, and he's hit the nail on the head. He says the US market cake is quite big, so it depends on what you're aiming for. There'll be many operators happy with what they get from the remaining 20%. And I think that's true. And I think that's what we're starting to see now. It's easy to get carried away with kind of listening to DraftKings analyst calls because these are the high profile companies that are aiming for market leading share in every state that they're active in. But actually, they're in the minority as the top 5 operators. The others will be looking at that remaining 20% and thinking, how can we maximize our business resources and our strategy in order to make revenue from the US market that is profitable in the long term? That isn't, that doesn't see us take up a market leading position. And we've seen a couple of examples of that this week or in the recent weeks. And one of those is Betson, obviously. They're not going to come in and compete with FanDuel and BetMGM and DraftKings with the BetSafe brand because there's no cut through with that to US consumers whatsoever. So what they're doing is kind of chasing a B2B sportsbook strategy in the US. So there might be another 50 to 100 companies that want to launch sports betting in the US in the future. And they're saying, well, we have experience of this. We have our own proprietary sportsbook. Our own sportsbook has been on this platform for a number of years now. It's proven in Europe. We have the track record, so we can sell our technology to you. And I think this week they launched a sportsbook in Colorado, at long last, I might add, because as my former colleague Julian Rogers points out on Twitter, their market access agreement in Colorado was actually struck 607 days ago. So it's not been plain sailing for Betson to get to this point. But what they've done is they've launched BetSafe as a B2C sportsbook app in Colorado. So sports bettors can download the app, play on BetSafe. But this is literally just as a showcase to the wider industry to say, this is what we can do for you, and you can come in and basically purchase our technology, and we'll power your app, and we'll put your brand on it instead of the BetSafe brand. And this is just one example of a different path that these companies are going to be able to take in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, as
Yeah,
popped up
and
here,
now we get to the key talking point at last.
Yes, this is the most important point in the entire stream today. I mean, just the image of Pontus Lindvall in his absolutely beautiful, immaculate suit that he's wearing should be able to give Betson another at least 1% market share in the state of Colorado once this image is shared online for all to see in that state. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful, and Pontus really suits in this.
Yeah, well, I mean, Pontus has been a style icon of mine for some time now, Pierre, and I'm sure he is for you as well. And that jacket looks like, it might have come from a fancy dress shop, but knowing Pontus as I do, it's probably been custom made from one of the leading European designers just to match his glasses, I would have thought. But yeah, style icon of the industry for sure.
Yes, as I say, Jake, really good fashion people, they are really good at following trends. But the best fashionistas, they are the one who create trends, okay? And Pontus Lindvall, I would put in the same bracket as Coco Chanel or Giorgio Armani, for example. That's absolutely true. Yeah, just for the second time here. I mean, it's definitely worth to see this another time. Immaculate, I must say. Perfectly fitted. Everything is just beautiful.
It makes me laugh, the contrast, because if you ever listen to him on analyst calls, he's so deadpan and so serious, and then obviously walks into the Betson office with a cake full of candles and a US blazer on. It's just like, where does that side of the personality come from? But,
yeah, exactly. It's a funny dichotomy. And also, when Pontus went through all of this drama that he was about to get kicked off as the Betson CEO. He was then reinstated by some of the major shareholders. At that time, in the official company presentation, they photoshopped Pontus to be Luke Skywalker as the Return of the Jedi.
Of course they did.
Which was brilliant as well. So yeah, we are big fans of Betsson here, as you can.
I thought you were going to say the Leonardo DiCaprio meme in Wolf of Wall Street, where he walks back in and says, "I'm not leaving."
that would be more appropriate, I think. If you can animate him
if you cut the expletives out, yeah.
That's brilliant. That's awesome. But as you mentioned here, Jake, just to go back to the topic, we have another 7 minutes here, by the way, so we're gonna compact the last couple of new points that we have here as well. But yes, Betsson is launching their sportsbook in the state of Colorado. They are going live now from the other day with the BetSafe brand as a B2C. But this is very much like a showcase for the sportsbook product, right? They are not exactly aiming for massive market share in the state of Colorado. They want to go live with BetSafe in order to showcase the B2B sportsbook product, which they're trying to sell to other operators who are keen to go live with perhaps a cheaper alternative to a sportsbook rather than Kambi and other major platforms.
They're not going to launch a sportsbook in any other states. This is purely an example of what they're capable of doing on the B2B side.
Absolutely. And just jumping from one thing to the other here, Jake. I mean, staying on the topic of US, it's a lot of US at the moment, of course. And we had one of the main news points here this week is another huge SPAC deal that Novibet is going public now, and they have their own US ambitions here. Can you talk about this a little bit as well, Jake?
Yeah, and this is another example of what we've been discussing. It's a European first operator that's never going to compete with the market leaders, but it sees the US as an opportunity, and it's chosen the SPAC to enter that market. SPACs have been sort of going out of fashion recently, so it's interesting to see them use a special purpose acquisition company to list. I know Super Group is obviously another one that's pulled that off recently, but yeah. So Novibet, to dig a bit deeper into this business, they're basically Greece focused, and they operate in 4 regulated European markets, which is Greece, Ireland, Italy, and Malta. And they were in the UK up until I think the back end of last year, but as with many operators before them, including Betsson, actually chose to withdraw from the UK just because regulatory costs were mounting. And it's a similar situation there where the established companies have kind of mopped up most of the market share. But yeah, so they've chosen a SPAC to get additional cash resources to eventually launch in the US, and they've struck a market access agreement already with Caesars, I think it is, to launch in. I know they're definitely launching in Pennsylvania, and they're definitely launching in New Jersey in 2023, and they're also going to launch in Ontario before the end of this year, actually, as well. So yeah, they're looking at kind of North America and LATAM expansion as a whole, but it remains to be seen again, kind of what market share they're realistically able to achieve, because while they're a successful business in Europe, it's not like they have an outstanding track record in any of the regulated markets that they operate in, perhaps with the exception of Greece, which is their domestic market. But so they'll have £135 million of unrestricted cash when this SPAC deal completes, and they've said that will be used on M&A, basically, to buy operators that probably have more brand cut through in that space. But 135 million of unrestricted cash is not a lot in the grand scheme of things when you see some of the prices that are being bandied about for companies previously. I don't know what you think about this approach.
Yeah, I mean, I just took one really interesting note here, which is the fact that SPACs tend, like during the pandemic especially, it was a lot thanks to the SPACs that the multiples in acquisition went up a lot.
Yeah.
So there are quite a number of SPACs that are desperately looking for investments, right, to turn companies public and to to go live, and so what tends to happen is that the SPACs get desperate and they overpay for the investment. And I really raised an eyebrow when I saw the price of the acquisition of Novibet, because keep in mind, I mean, Novibet in 2021 generated 183 million GGR, and from that 183 million, they made $18 million EBITDA, so they had about 10% EBITDA margin. So 18 million USD EBITDA, and the valuation that the SPAC paid was 696 million, where we are talking about a 38 times multiple. It's absolutely eyebrow raising here to look at it, and it is incredible. I mean, I wonder how on earth they are going to be able to justify that that valuation, but and especially considering that they don't have any local know-how in the US market here. They are kind of building from scratch in that market. So to me, that's the most eyebrow raising part of this deal, at least, but not surprising for a SPAC at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. The price does seem staggeringly high, but what I would say is that the chairman and the chairman and the co-CEO of Artemis, which is the SPAC, does have a lot of experience in US online gambling and gambling. So she's already Holly Gagnon is her name. She's already a non-executive director at Bragg Gaming, and she's got quite significant experience at Pearl River Resort and a lot of the tribal enterprises, and was also a divisional VP of finance at Caesars all the way back in 2010. So yeah, she has a lot of land-based experience and know-how behind her, and I think the rest of the Artemis executive team probably does. But yeah, whether you can sew that into a European on and one other benefit for Novibet, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. By the way, I agree with you, but they do own their own technology, which is a plus, as we've seen. But it's whether that technology is going to be able to compete on a product basis, like you say, especially with a brand that is completely unknown in the US. So yeah, good luck to them. They're going to need it.
Good luck, Novibet. We'll be there to cover the progress. Final thing today before we close the stream today is the ever-recurring New York State. And why we love New York State is because they report the numbers every single week, which makes it really interesting to compare the market share between the major operators. And I would just like to see if we can get this graph here up on the stream. Which basically displays the amount of handle that the three major operators in the United States, in the New York State, has had week per week since the opening of the state. So we are displaying Caesars, DraftKings, and FanDuel. And Jake, you have been putting this graph together here. I mean, what's your brief analysis here of the numbers, the number of handle in New York State here, week per week?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I'd say the graph speaks for itself. FanDuel has obviously got quite a significant lead in New York as it stands in terms of handle, as it does in many other states. DraftKings is second, and Caesars obviously had that kind of crazy period at the start where they managed to attract a lot of customers into the business, but they've not stuck around for one reason or another. It might be because they were taking advantage of generous bonus offers, and once they had used those up, decided to go elsewhere for their customer experience. Or it might be because they were experiencing, issues with product, and they wanted a better user experience somewhere else. But because you aren't able to see the exact numbers on that graph, it might help if I just clarify. So you've got FanDuel leading on 167. 167.9, and then you've got DraftKings second on 110.8, and then you've got Caesars in third. This is for week 11, so the most recent figures on 67.7.
Right. Yeah, it's another interesting graph here, as you can tell here, the fact that FanDuel has been quite steadily been able to grow their market share, whereas, for example, Caesars, they launched big, but they were not able to retain the players, which FanDuel has stated in the quarterly report is due to the fact that they just have a superior product. And hence why they are able to retain that high market share. So really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we're following up on this every week here because it's great to see. We are in love with statistics here, and it just goes to show on a much more clear level what is actually happening in the New York State, who is actually the winner, who is the loser here. So it seems to be stabilizing now, the numbers, and we are right in the we are obviously past March Madness here, which was a big month, and now we'll see when there aren't any major kind of happenings for the moment in the state, how this handle is going to continue to develop. My feeling is that it's going to drop quite significantly now in the next couple of weeks and months, because US sports betting is very seasonal, but it remains to be seen, of course.
Yeah,
Jake,
and just to
of course.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, just for some context and another statistic, because I know you love stats, Pierre. BetMGM, which wasn't on that graph, are probably the fourth biggest operator in New York at 43 million in handle for week 11. So it's still, some way off the top three. But in the chasing pack.
Great stuff. Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on here today. This was absolutely brilliant. Great to have Robin, Eric Reed on board as well, with some fantastic insights. I mean, let's have a great weekend now. And thanks to everyone for listening in as well. Jake, I love your funnel shirt. It's looking absolutely immaculate as well. Not as good as Pontus, but still.
No US flag on it.
Yeah, brilliant. And let's have a great day ahead, and we will see you here next week. There we go.
Thank you very much, Pierre.
A third and last time. Just enjoy this, feel positive, bring happiness with you from this image, and have a great week, everyone.
Yeah,
thank you so
hopefully
much.
Hopefully I did Nico justice. I'm sure he'll be back next week to reclaim his seat.
No, absolutely, Jake. Anytime.
Cheers,
thank you so much, everyone.